Good morning, all. It is my pleasure today to introduce Rick Peck, otherwise known as the Philanthropy Guy. Rick, it is an absolute pleasure to have you. I want to give you guys a little bit of background about Rick. Rick has a lengthy career working in the philanthropy space, both working with donors and institutions for the good of the charitable world. And for the last 6 years, Rick has been with the New Hampshire Community Foundation, and prior to that, years with Dartmouth College. So two mega players in the philanthropy space, Rick. And as we work our way into this conversation today, we're very proud to have you on board with the charitable pay raise. And it's been a pleasure as we seek to get different perspectives on philanthropy, on the space, obviously how our new tool can help, but more importantly, helping people understand first and foremost how they can give and what charities are seeing these days, and how it relates to a variety of factors that going into being a great donor. And we want to inspire people to do that. So first and foremost, Rick, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself? And first, what drew you to the space of philanthropy to begin with?
So thank you, Bill. It is a pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate you having me. So I started as a wealth advisor with American Express Financial Advisors starting in 1998 and through 2005. So I was a personal financial advisor working on retirement planning, education planning, talked about insurance planning, long-term care, disability insurance, life insurance, cash value, savings, all that kind of stuff. And then I would, we were talking about tax reduction strategies and also recommending things around, people's wills and their trusts. So it was kind of the six key areas of financial planning, and I enjoyed it. And then I actually went in as became a franchisee from 2000 to 2005. But while I was doing that, my wife was working at Dartmouth College, and she said she was a dietitian there. And she said, "What do you think about working at Dartmouth?" And I said, "I don't think I have anything to offer. I'm a financial advisor. I don't know what I would do there." And she said, "Well, let's just see if there's something." And so we looked, and it was associate director of gift planning. And I said, "Well, that's interesting." So you travel around the country, you talk to alumni of the undergraduate school, and you talk to them about a bequest intention or a charitable gift annuity or a charitable remainder trust or real estate giving. And it was a group of 10 people in just the gift planning office, which most nonprofits don't even have one person representing gift planning. So I was out there just really low pressure, just, you know, engaging people in a topic that they love to talk about, which is their alma mater. And then I became a little bit later, a few years later, became director of gift planning for the medical school at Dartmouth. And so then I was doing similar work, but now I'm working with people who were sometimes dual degree. So they were people who had graduated with a medical degree, but maybe they were also undergraduates as well. So that was interesting. Then I moved into Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center, which is a major medical center here in New Hampshire. So I was doing both. I was director of gift planning for both the medical school at Dartmouth and Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center. So you're dealing
Wow.
with people who are graduates from a school, and then you're also grateful patients of a hospital. And actually, sometimes there was more volume with the grateful patients of the hospital and their families. So then I started to grow into major gifts with the same umbrella, $50,000 or more outright gifts, and then principal gifts of $1 million or more. I worked in that. So then I started to supervise a team full of planned giving, major gifts, and principal giving. And then in 2017, I became the VP for Development and Philanthropy Services at the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation, as you mentioned, and I did that for 6 years. And so that was working with potential donors, and professional advisors about helping with nonprofits throughout the state of New Hampshire and beyond. So I had, all those points, right? Financial advisor in the for-profit world, and then in the not-for-profit world, academia, healthcare, and community foundations. And then now I'm a independent philanthropy advisor. So I feel like I'm taking 7 years of financial planning and almost 18 years of charitable giving and trying to wrap them all up into something that hopefully is valuable for people.
I think you've come at it from about every angle. So,
Yeah, I think so.
so yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
Um,
thank you.
I think we're being joined by someone. So at any
Okay.
rate, I did
All
not know
right.
that, but at any rate,
Okay.
um, so tell us about where you are now, Rick. Tell us about what you're doing as the philanthropy guy. And I note that on the net, we found a number of resources that you've developed to help people. So why don't we start off talking a little about that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So in my role now, I kind of think of my business as split in two parts. First is that Richard C. Peck Consulting is my consulting arm. And so that's working with nonprofits who either do not have a fundraising program or they do have a fundraising program and they are just trying to take it to the next level. Also, with Richard C. Peck Consulting, I do work with donors and potential donors, people who are probably trying to give away a lot of money, don't know how to do it, don't know how to make donations, are really kind of struggling with that, and they're going to be making some big decisions. So that's key. And then the third group kind of blends into what I'll talk about next, which is working with professional advisors, CPAs, wealth advisors, trust and estates attorneys, and family offices, and just trying to get on a platform and speak to them where they already come together. So CPA Academy or a group called Lineberg Information Services or My CPE. People are going to get their CE credits, and they a lot of the time these platforms do not have a track on philanthropic giving. So I'm literally trying to go to where they are. So that's kind of what I do now. People would pay me to sometimes come in and do that work, to speak to their clientele or to speak, to be on a retainer, for example. That would be another way to go about it. And again, that bleeds into my other leg, which is the philanthropy guy. And the philanthropy guy is really just strictly speaking, it's a educational platform. So
Oh,
it's webinars, it's courses, it's articles. It's basically, I envision it as anything where people say, gee, I'm really stuck on anything to do with philanthropic giving. Maybe I go there and I learn about XYZ. And I'm also almost on the verge of publishing a book, which was the same idea. It's like these are things that I don't see as often as I'd like to see. So I'd like to put it together in at least some sort of a manual. So anyway, that's kind of what I'm doing. Is it's aggregating all this information in a way that honestly feels, in my opinion, just purely helpful. Uh, doing the curation where others are going to be like, I don't know where to start to look for this stuff, or I don't know where to go, and so just trying to make it easy, honestly, for people to have the philanthropic conversation.
well, you're 100% right. I have found in my own practice that people don't know where to begin. It's kind of the great big gray area out there. They're well intended. They know that they're interested, which is a great place to be for starters. But then after that, they don't know the language. They don't know who to go to, and you're really in a very valuable and important place. It looks to me like you're the link between do-gooders and institutions that need help. And with to that end, we're on the verge of September. We're basically 2/3 of the way through 2023. Tell us from your perspective, what have you seen in 2023 in the world of philanthropy and charitable giving? I know that there are ebbs and flows in that world, so why don't you give us a little update?
Sure. So I'd say the outlook overall is better than it started in the beginning of 2023. You're talking about like interest rates being high. They had the regional bank crises, of course. But last few months seems like we've had a recovery. The markets seem to be showing a positive trend, almost like 15% to date, which is good because that's always a concern in the world of philanthropy is will the market cooperate? So it's reasonable, I think, to expect growth from 2022 levels in the philanthropic market, which wasn't so bad last year, but it could be even better this year. If the economy continues to grow, if the market continues to grow, I think that um, philanthropy will likely follow suit. What's kind of interesting about philanthropy, and maybe you've experienced the same thing, Bill, is that there's a lagging effect. So in other words, if we're in a bull market and then it becomes a bear market, people start or continue to give at the levels that they gave in the bull market, as if there is no bear market. They're just kind of in the same groove. And then vice versa, when there's a bear market and the market's been down and it's it's been pretty bad. But then it goes up and you're starting to see a recovery. People still anchor themselves in that bear market mentality. So it's like, well, I don't know, the market's really doing bad and it was doing badly. So I don't know, we're not ready to make that recovery. And it's like, well, look at your statement. You're doing okay now. Like you can bring it back. So it's a psychological thing, I think, for
Completely.
people. Yeah. So I'd
I
say
agree
that
with
that's
you.
something to try to overcome. And when that's overcome, I think, or when you can help to see that overcome. The other thing I was going to mention is, as far as donation patterns, there's a little religion is the number one thing that people give to, but that's actually shifting downward a little bit,
I was going to
and
ask
more
you.
toward other sectors. Yeah, I'll give you some stats actually on that, which is kind of interesting.
Please
And
do.
uh, and there's a uh, concentration of donations from smaller, uh, wealthier donors. So like, in other words, that, when they talk about the 80-20 rule, 80% of the donations come from 20%. You can continue to see that kind of trend of mega donors and people who are making huge impact out there, and that is obviously expected to increase as their wealth increases. And sometimes they're immune to the markets. Sometimes people are making money in all kinds of different ways regardless of what the stock market's doing. And that was my experience too, is that people will give, and come from, they'll have money parked in cash, or they'll have a different type of asset that's growing. And so they don't seem to be as affected as people who maybe have more wealth in the market. So that's an interesting thing. The phenomenon, in some ways, I always thought that was out there for the wealthier individuals.
You mentioned a second ago that there's been a little bit of a downtick as it pertains to giving towards religious institutions. And is that affected by things such as Ukraine? I don't know if that plays into it at all. Things like the horrible devastation on Maui in Lahaina
Yep.
and other
Yep.
things like that. I'm thinking back to the days of Katrina and those sorts of natural disasters that really America seems to rally around to try and help people out. I was just wondering, is it true with dollars and gifts as it is with clothing and manpower?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. I don't know. It could be that, religion is, maybe people aren't as religious as they used to be. Some people are very religious and they give to, spiritual causes, and others, maybe, as you say, either they're not as religious as they used to be and there's a downward trend there, or they get distracted by disaster relief, which, that makes sense, right? So there's a big cause. I'm not sure if it's like, binary like that. I'm going to give less to religion because I'm giving more to,
Hmm,
disaster relief, but I don't know. It's a trend to watch for sure. I think, and another way to think about it is maybe people are becoming more diverse in the way they think about their charitable giving, which is not a bad thing at all. It says, I'm becoming either wealthier and I can spread more money out, or I'm just becoming more enlightened to different ideas beyond, the core of tithing to my church, 10% of my
sure.
income, or whatever the case may be.
Have you seen any particular types of charities that are really on an uptick?
Well, I have some interesting stats here from a group called
Sure.
Giving USA, which is a terrific resource for people if you want to go there. I think it has the most comprehensive hard data. And it's from 2022. So but it's a good gauge on what has happened, and probably what will be happening in the future.
Okay.
So one thing I think is a fascinating number is, Americans donated almost $500 billion to charity last year. $500 billion, half a trillion
Amazing.
dollars. And then the breakdown is 73% came from individuals, 21% came from foundations, and 6% came from corporations. And then, to your point about, subsectors, these are the stats. Religion, it grew by 5.2% last year. But generally, again, the trend is downward. But last year it went up by 5.2%. Healthcare was 5.1% uptick. Arts, culture, and humanities was a 2.9% uptick.
Okay.
Subsectors that were declining were, giving, believe it or not, to human services. That was down like almost 1%. Also, education was down almost 4%. And
Wow.
public society giving, that was down almost 9%. And environmental and animal organizations is kind of a, I think, a strange pairing, but that's the way Giving USA pairs them. That was down almost 2%. So those were all down while the others were up. Again, it was
That is
religion,
interesting.
healthcare, and arts and culture. So yeah,
That is that is very interesting, actually.
yeah.
So good
And
stuff.
it, and that and so who's to say who knows where that will go this year, as you say, with Maui and other, maybe hopefully there's no more disasters in the last uh, part of the year, but who knows where that will go. So anyway, Giving USA will report out on 2023 numbers in the early part of next year.
Sure. Well, my next question, I think you've actually spoken to, but I was just going to have you elaborate a little bit more. But with inflation and where it is right now, and dollars seemingly being consumed more by just basic needs, um, what happens at institutions like a community foundation and things like that? Do they tend to lose donations at a time like this, or do people just keep on plugging and make their way through their lives independently, but they're going to maintain that gift every year or whatever it is,
I mean,
or
I'll speak.
major gifts?
Yeah, I'll just speak from my personal experience, and I'll just give you some more stats here, which I think are really super interesting. I find that um, when the market is fluctuating, I spoke to this a little bit before. Like I said, when the market's fluctuating and inflation is an issue, you do see a downward trend or less robust giving from people who are less wealthy. And so, in other words, annual funds and sort of that recurring gift, you might see that on a downward trend, or they might skip a year because they're feeling the pinch. But people of above a certain wealth level, they actually are somewhat immune to it. They'll still give. It's almost like,
That
even
makes
during
sense.
2020, I remember being surprised that people would call up and say, "Yeah, I know we're in a pandemic, but I'd still like to make a gift of $250,000 to blah blah blah." And you'd go, "Oh, okay, well, great, terrific." It just kind of brought me into a different space of these people. And maybe 2020 is not a great example because the market was going up, but I honestly think that regardless of where the market was going, these people had already made decisions about what they were going to do. So I mean, as far as statistics, in 2022, individuals gave $319 billion, just individuals. That was a decline, but you just talked about what the trends are. It declined 6.4%
Boy.
after two of the most generous giving years on record, 2020 and 2021. Now, this is what I was talking about before. Mega gifts by individuals, that totaled $14 billion in 2022 and represented about 5% of all giving totals. And that was the second year in a row. Again, these fluctuations are there. I wouldn't say it's a massive downward trend. One of the things I wanted to mention too is giving by bequest is, in the Giving USA report, is separated out. And for today, I actually lumped it together. It totaled an estimated $46 billion in 2022. And that was a 2.3% increase over 2021. But it was a bit of a decline when you think about inflation. So inflation definitely high inflation these days has a factor in sort of the actual impact.
Sure.
But still, I think that's a good sign that people are still using planned giving as part of their overall
Huh.
strategy. And then giving by corporations, that increased by 3.4%, and that was almost $30 billion. But so that was the strongest growth rate of all of the different categories: individuals, bequests, foundations, and corporations. Corporations were coming in strong. So that's good. So with 2023 and inflation, maybe it tapers off a little bit. Hopefully, markets do well, and we'll see where that goes.
Great information and surprising information on a couple of fronts. And you
Yeah.
just mentioned planned giving, and I want to kind of go in that direction for a minute. I've been fortunate to work on a council, if you will, that supports planned giving at my alma mater at Colgate, and it has been interesting over the years to see the ebbs and flows in that area and what affects it, which can be anything from a new president at the university to, the basketball team has a great year and numbers go up. and other times they go down. But to that end, I read two articles over probably the last 6 or 7 months that address the issue of, I'm going to ask you to define this, but it spoke about mid-level donors and how many institutions don't put much emphasis on marketing to that space, but how important it was to the annual operating expenses of the institutions. It cited 38% of the annual operating budget came from that source. And I was wondering, why don't institutions pay more attention to that? Seems pretty big.
It is big. So I'll answer that in two different ways. One is just through the definition, and one through just some experience that I'd had. So in the nonprofit world, they categorize mid-level donors as individuals or organizations who donate more than, the average donor, but less than sort of major sponsors or donors, like you said, sort of in that sweet spot. It's typically $1,000 to $10,000 per institution that would be considered a mid-level donor. Major gifts, as I'd mentioned before, when I was at Dartmouth, was 50,000 or more. But at $10,000, you're starting to raise your hand a little bit and say, I'm kind of serious about this institution. Or what it can also indicate is this is a throwaway gift for me, or it's a test gift. It's like, how are you going to steward me as an institution if I give you $10,000? And I've seen it where someone was giving $10,000 per year, no problem. And then they were later solicited and they gave $1 million. So it was like,
Oh, hello.
yeah. So, but they were sort of showing up as a mid-level donor. So I think to your point, focusing a little bit more on that mid-level donor, that's like an inflection point. They could either say, yeah, I've got more money than this, and I'd like to become a major level donor or a principal giving donor, but I'm testing the water. Like I'm kind of spraying a little bit of money out on a lot of different institutions. So to your question, like why don't they pay attention, is because so much of a campaign or so much of it's the charitable giving space is built on the massive gifts that you can get. So those individuals are getting a lot of attention. And then you're trying to build your base of annual fund donors, right? Almost to a fault, you're paying attention to the smallest level donors, but somehow the mid levels do get missed. And I'll just speak personally, when I was at Dartmouth, we did pay attention to both those sides, right? We paid attention to the small annual fund donors, or the consistent annual fund donors, and definitely the largest donors. But the ones in the middle, sometimes we would be assigned as field officers to donors, and I would see people in the mid range not assigned at all. And I thought, well, that's strange. Why wouldn't we assign them? It's because I think it goes back to, there's the frequency donors, the lower level frequency donors, and then there's the high level massive mega donors. And the ones in the middle, just, I don't know, they just don't get the same kind of attention, but we need to give them attention.
Rick, you got to do a webinar. They need some love.
Well, I'll say two things that I feel like are speaking to the mid-level donor. One of them
Uh-huh.
is the program that you have, the charitable pay raise. I think it's a very creative solution. You work with individuals, company stock, in their 401ks, people that are concerned about taxes, and they have too much concentrated risk, right, in their portfolio. So that's an easy way to go to these people and find their pain points and say, hey, if you're charitably inclined, let's see if we can reduce your taxes and increase your cash flow. I mean, that's an easy conversation, and then create a legacy later, as we were talking about. Planned giving is important. And then on the flip side, we were talking about charities, helping them build their endowments, help them build their donor base and their overall funding. So I think you're just, coming to the table. What I appreciate about what you do is you come to the table and you say, listen, there's a lot of money to unlock. People have problems, taxes and so on, concentrated stock risk. And let's talk about it. Let's bring some solutions forward and see if we can make some rain here and do some good things. So that's what I appreciate about what you're doing. And then also there's a solution that is completely underutilized, I think, called the charitable lead annuity trust. It's called a CLAT. And then that, when I think of mid-level donors, if people are giving $10,000 a year to say $100,000 a year to all charities, that's a good solution for them because they can take these assets and put them into the lead trust, and then the lead trust pays out this amount of money to the nonprofits each and every year. And if it's a certain type of lead trust, they can get a tax deduction and it can come back into their estate after a certain point. Or if it's another type of lead trust, it's actually pushed out of their estate, and so they avoid estate taxes and so on. So that's a solution that I feel like has been in front of us when interest rates were really low, and I just couldn't understand it. I was like, why don't we do more lead trusts when people have these assets and they're trying to get money, either a tax deduction or an estate tax relief? And I was just shocked that we weren't putting this forward. So to me, that speaks back to what we were talking about before, is making sure advisors understand what the options are,
Sure.
tapping into people like you, tapping into people like me, and say, listen, there's all kinds of things you can bring to your clients. Um, just talk about what their pain points are, and they're either going to give money to their kids, as like they're going to give money to taxes, or they can give money to charity, and they get to make choices on that. But I do believe that these more sophisticated, a little bit more technical strategies, they need to have some time for us to talk about those. And so we're counting on these CPAs, wealth advisors, trust and estates attorneys to open up the door for people like you and me to come in and go, okay, let's talk about all the things you're trying to do, and let's see if we can come up with a comprehensive solution here.
Well, I think what you've done is inspired a new webinar for me, talking about compare and contrast what we're doing at the charitable pay raise and a clap.
Yeah.
And they're both really wonderful tools, but they're not identical. And it neither they both have the right place for the right donor, the right person. But very much thank you for mentioning us today, because our goal is to help charity by creating what amounts to being a guaranteed planned gift for life. So that charity can actually, include it in its budget from year to year, because they know it's coming. And upon um, the client's demise, there's going to be a legacy defining bequest at
Yeah.
the finish line. So that principal gift, will arrive, and it will be 7 or 8 figures at the finish line. And it involves what we call a reusable dollar. So the client can benefit during their lifetime. The charity's getting a nice cash flow during their lifetime, but upon death, it's really significant in their ability to do something really meaningful in the name of their families or their loved ones or whatever was important to them during their lifetime. It's pretty fun.
Right. Yeah.
So
No, it's great. Yeah.
good stuff. So where do you see, and maybe you just mentioned it, but where do you see philanthropy going as we look into 2024 and beyond? Are there some new kids on the block out there?
Well, I mean, new kids on the block in terms of, well, there's
Yes.
always new opportunities to give, right? Well, actually, I'll speak to this. When you say new kids on the block, I'll just speak specifically to nonprofits.
Yeah.
Um, there's a lot of nonprofits that are well branded and people know about them: American Cancer Society, St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital, and so on. And good for them. They're doing great work. There's a lot of nonprofits that nobody knows about. So when you say new kids on the block, I think it's like the those who don't have a spotlight put on them because they don't have any sort of program.
I'm
They
giving
don't
you the
have any.
light right now.
Yeah, no. I'm just saying in general. When I say this, I'm thinking about the smallest nonprofits that are doing really impactful work, and no one's really singing their praises because they're not well advertised. So going back to like what's new, I'd say there's so many nonprofits to explore. All the different categories I mentioned. You could go national, you could go international, you could go late local, you could go hyper local. There's all kinds of ways to say, these are my interests as a donor. What's out there that fits my interest, and what are the most impactful nonprofits that the really big bang for the buck? If I gave them $10,000, what would they do with that? Some of these nonprofits, that would be a
Amen.
major gift for them. That would be a principal gift for them, some of them. So I think that there's that. And I'd say from the the donor's perspective, I mean, there are always people selling businesses, right? They're kind of new kids on the block. They're like, wow, I've made more money than I ever thought possible. I have enough money for my family. I have enough money for myself, but taxes are probably going to be a concern at this point. And also legacy, as you talked about before, and impact. Like, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? now that I've done this, what's my purpose? Like, how can I make an impact? And again, great examples of that publicly are Bill and Melinda Gates, Mackenzie Scott. These are people who have more money than they'll ever spend, and they really care about going out and trying to do what they can do. And I know this sounds absurd, but even at the wealth level that they have, they can't do everything. They can't make an impact in all kinds of ways that are possible. Even they have to concentrate down on how they're going to make their impact. So those are extreme examples. And then there are the average person who can come forward and say, today I'm going to look at 2024 differently, and I'm going to see what I can do relative to my asset size and my income size. Like, what can I do to be helpful? But
That's
two more
great.
things I think I'll just mention is uh, when I think about people holding stock, they've held it for a long, long time, a lot of them. And so it's, 30 years worth of capital gains, right? So that when, going back to, I mentioned people sell businesses, but there's also the stock that you bought a long time ago that you don't want to sell. And so there's that. And so they can be new kids on the block in the sense of, look at, I'm a major donor now. Like I gave this stock away and that I wasn't going to sell. And I've done something important with it. And the other thing I think about is like new kids on the block is people who are 70 and a half or older, and they have a required minimum distribution. Well, actually, these days it's 73 years old that you have to make your required minimum distribution. But at age 70 and a half, you can make a distribution in the form of what's called a qualified charitable
Oh,
distribution. So I think of those as people to say, I never thought of myself as a philanthropist. I've made enough money to retire comfortably, but now I can show up and give a donation, not to a donor advised fund with a QCD, but you can do it with all kinds of other types of funds or an outright gift. So in those ways, I kind of feel like these are all the new kids, the new and upcoming nonprofits. It's the business owner that arrived, and then it's the people who have done a good job saving money. And now they're sort of like, okay, now what am I going to do with it? So as you can tell, I feel like there's opportunity everywhere.
absolutely. And at the charitable pay raise, those are actually two of the focuses that we look for because we can help eliminate a huge portion of the capital gains taxes on that person that's had the stock for 30 years and all those gains. Or maybe the business owner wants to dedicate a portion of their business to something that will help give them tax-free cash flow the rest of their life, but at the same time tie it into a charitable entity, which is super positive. And by the way, under Secure Act 2.0, I think they've extended up to age 75 now the required minimum distributions.
Yeah,
All right.
that'll be pushed out a little farther,
Yeah,
and I think the $100,000 per year limit is going to be indexed for inflation, so that's good too. So
that
that
is
gives
good.
people more money that they can distribute. So I mean, I think the essence of what you and I are talking about is there's a great need out there to give nonprofits money. People have wealth that's untapped for charitable purposes, and you and I are like the people that kind of bring it together and say, let's talk. I mean, totally there's so many opportunities that we can flesh out. Let's spend some time talking about these things. And then hopefully at the end of all that, people put their heads on the pillow at night and they go, I'm glad that I did that. I feel
Yeah,
good about that. I never thought I could do that. I never thought I could
right.
make that kind of impact. And people like Bill and Rick and others are showing me how to do that. And I think that's a very powerful and honorable thing that we're able to do with people. It's just that I don't feel like enough people are approaching us about it because they don't know we exist, or they don't think that they're a philanthropist in the traditional sense,
Well, I
right?
know you've been very involved in getting the word out and creating various institutions and entities to get advisors together and hopefully magnify giving and letting more people know that they can be impactful.
Yeah.
Surprisingly so. And you, to your point, there are a lot of small nonprofits that are doing fantastic work. And maybe it's the way of helping people find where those are in their own backyard. It gives them a little cachet and a little good feeling to go down and see their dollars at work. it's good.
Yeah.
All good stuff.
If I could give you one more, are we out of time?
No, we've got just a
Okay.
minute or two. That's all
All
good.
right. I want to tell you just a story about a bequest intention. This one gentleman I talked to, and he said, in the future, I'm going to leave money to this what was called the child life specialist area of the hospital, where people would sit down and they would play with kids before they were going to go into major surgery. So it's kind of basically like de-escalating their anxiety. And this guy, he fell in love with that program. But he said, I'm going to give money in the future. But he was so enamored with it. Once we showed him what he could do, he started giving money now. And I just say that because to me that's what it is like people get inspired and then they realize
Amen.
technically I can do these things and now I will and now he you know what he said he goes I think of he's a single guy he goes I think about how much money can I save so that I give the most amount of money to that child life program and make the most impact. I mean, that's how inspired he was. He was almost living a little meagerly so that he could give them as much money as possible from his own estate. And that really touched my heart. I
That's
was like,
awesome.
wow, this guy is really something. So
That is a great story. Good stuff. Hey, if someone needs to find you, wants to find Rick Peck, how do they find you?
you can find me at thephilanthropyguy.com. That's my website. And they can also email me at thephilanthropyguy@gmail.com, or they can
Awesome.
call me at 603-387-3897. That's my cell. But I was fortunate to be able to get the domain name of the Philanthropy Guy, and also amongst all the web addresses or the email addresses out there, I was able to secure the philanthropyguy@gmail.com. So those are the two ways or the many ways you can reach me.
Well, Rick, we thank you so much for spending time with us today. This is great. And for folks looking for it, it'll be on all of our social media, website to LinkedIn to Facebook, a recording of this. So if you want to send members of your organization over to listen for a few minutes and pick up a few thoughts, by all means do. And we look forward to connecting with you again in the future, Rick. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.
Thank you, Bill.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.